Thank you all for coming to today's VIP Distinguished Series Speaker event. My name is Alex Hodges, and I am a member of the VIP Distinguished Speakers Committee. Today, Dean Gilligan will be interviewing Doug Ulman, the CEO and President of the Lance Armstrong Foundation. Today's event will begin with a Q&A between Dean Gilligan and Mr. Ulman, followed by a Q&A from the audience. As the event will end promptly at 6:30, I ask that you refrain from leaving until the end. Finally, please turn all cell phones to silent as I introduce today's guests. Thomas Gilligan is the 10th Dean of the McCombs School of Business at the University of Texas at Austin, and currently holds the Centennial Chair in Business Education Leadership. Prior to his appointment at McCombs, Dr. Gilligan held several key administrative roles at the Marshall School of Business at the University of Southern California. He received his BA at the University of Oklahoma and his PhD.
You to take that out.
My mistake. And his PhD in economics at the Washington University. He taught economics at the California Institute of Technology, and during his tenure at USC, he held several visiting appointments at Stanford University and Northwestern University. He was the recipient of the National Fellowship at the Hoover Institution of War and Peace, and was a staff economist at the Council of Economic Advisors in the White House. He also served in the United States Air Force from 1972 to 1976. His areas of interest and expertise include microeconomics, applied price theory, industrial organization, antitrust economics, and public choice. Doug Ulman is the President and Chief Executive Officer of the Lance Armstrong Foundation, and he is ultimately responsible for the strategic vision and direction of Livestrong. Mr. Ulman is a 3-time cancer survivor and a nationally recognized career advocate. After overcoming chondrosarcoma and malignant melanoma twice during his sophomore year in college, Mr. Ulman and his family founded the Ulman Cancer Fund for Young Adults, a nonprofit organization that supports young adults, families, and friends who are affected by cancer. He served as Executive Chief Director for the Ulman Cancer Fund for 4 years before joining the Livestrong Foundation as the Director of Survivorship in 2001. Mr. Ulman has received numerous awards for his leadership and community service. In 2002, he was selected for more than 20,000 individuals to appear on 15 million boxes of Wheaties Energy Crunch as an American everyday hero. In 2003, he was selected as the Austin Under 40 Award winner in the healthcare category. Most recently, Mr. Ulman was named to the nonprofit Times Power and Influence Top 50 for 2009, an honor bestowed to the top 50 nonprofit executives. Please welcome Doug Ulman and Dean Gilligan.
Thank you. Thanks, Alec, and welcome all of you to our VIP speaker series. Doug, welcome. Thanks for coming out on a rainy day.
Yeah,
in Austin. Normally we stay at home on days like this, but that's the way it is. Today's World Cancer Day. Tell us a little bit about what that means to you as a cancer survivor, and tell us a little bit more about your life by way of explaining that to us.
Sure. So today is World Cancer Day, and for those of you who don't know, cancer is soon to become the #1 cause of death around the world. So while cancer sometimes is not talked about in terms of the global burden and the global impact, more than 8 million people are going to die of this disease this year alone. And if we don't act quickly, it will become even more of a public health threat around the globe. So cancer is no longer a disease just of the Western world and the developed world, but actually more than 60% of all new cancer diagnoses are taking place in the developing world. And so today's a day to raise awareness and highlight those facts and try to mobilize non-governmental organizations and governments to really step up and address the cancer burden globally. So for me, as someone who was diagnosed at 19 with cancer and sort of went through that shock and that experience, it's a day to not only be proud of my own survivorship, but also a day to really reflect back and think about what else can we do to ensure that people, when they're diagnosed in the future, have the chance, as I have had, to live a fruitful, healthy life post-cancer.
Very interesting. This event, this VIP speaker series is attended mostly by students and by students who want to end up in significant leadership roles like the ones you've had. So I'm going to ask a lot of embarrassing questions about your life up to this point. What was your first job? What was your first leadership role, and what did you take away from it?
My first job I worked at a company when I was in high school called Heck Company, which is a department store owned by the May Company, which is an umbrella department store chain. And I worked in household domestics. So I learned to be an expert in linens and towels. And I just actually noticed the other day, when I was working at this job years ago, if you had 400 count threads in your sheets, that was really good. And now they're up to like 1,200, 1,600 count. But, the thing I learned the most from that is that it was a service job. And you had to interact every day with customers, and you heard what they wanted, and you had to listen, and you had to sort of try to provide the best service you could, and that's something that I'll never forget.
Does that help you in your current job?
Yeah, I mean, it absolutely does. We're so much about service. People with cancer and their families are those who we serve. And so I actually have a diagram above my desk that says Livestrong organizational chart. And at the top it has one big box, and it says the people we serve. And underneath it has one small box, and it says all of us. And that philosophy, I think, if you have the chance to work in a service business, you learn very quickly that if you don't provide great service, you're not going to last very long.
Yeah, interesting. Now, you were a sportsman as a young man, and even to this day. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I was fortunate enough to play soccer since I was 3 years old, and had the opportunity to play soccer in college. It was just a great sport that I love. But more importantly, I think taught me a lot about teamwork and a lot about setting goals as a group and trying to further those goals and accomplish great things. So it's something that I've missed. When you sort of play a sport or participate in an athletic activity for a period of time and then you sort of graduate from college and you don't have that anymore. We've tried to create a team culture at the foundation, which personally for me sort of hopefully fills a void.
I see. Yeah. Did you have a sporting hero that you admired growing up?
Wow, sporting hero. There's so many. That's a great question. It's interesting. Growing up in the States, you don't have the chance to really have soccer players as your heroes. So most of my, as a kid, most of the people I looked up to were played baseball or football. But that's a tough question. I don't know. I mean, I remember sort of Jesse Owens. I remember sort of looking back at the Olympics and sort of thinking about people who transcended sport. Yeah. And from my vantage point now, people like Muhammad Ali and people who just broke down barriers, Jackie Robinson and others. But as a kid, it was more sort of the traditional basketball, baseball, football player.
How about outside the sporting field? Who did you admire?
Well, clearly my parents. I really honestly believe, and people say this all the time, but they made some decisions in their life that shaped my life forever. The values that they instilled in my brother and I and what they taught us at a very early age are things that I think about every day. So I have to start there. And then, for me, anybody who leads a social movement. So Martin Luther King Jr., for example. I spend a lot of time reading about people like that. I just found out that I have the opportunity to go in March to meet Nelson Mandela. And so I'm beginning to sort of do the research. And the more you read, the more you sort of understand that people have not only overcome obstacles, but done things that in our sort of comfortable lives that we live on a daily basis, you can't even fathom what they've been through and what they stood up for and the ripple effect that that's had on the world.
Interesting, yeah. Speaking of obstacles, is there something you haven't mastered yet that you want to?
Tons. I clearly have not mastered flying. I'm mortified of flying. And somebody told me I should learn how to fly. You fly, so maybe you can give me some pointers on that. I have not mastered time management, and I have not mastered the ability to say no. I think I am someone who loves to serve others and loves to help others, and sometimes that gets in the way of being able to prioritize and say no to things.
Interesting. The students here at McCombs know that I'm a big fan of failure. You ought to try things that you have a chance of failing at. What's your biggest failure, the one maybe you learned the most from?
I could spend hours. I mean, I have failed personally on so many on so many fronts, and I think thinking first of all, I early in my career failed at managing, thinking that managing was easy. thinking that managing other people and driving towards a goal would be easy. I think that I'm trying to think. I mean, we have failed at so many things, but ultimately, it's not really a failure. We talk a lot at the foundation about the fact that if we fail in our mission, we will only have helped a few million people. And so you can say that's a failure because our end goal is to sort of eradicate the suffering and death due to cancer, which is the long-term sort of vision. But for me, I failed at time management. I failed at, in some cases, developing colleagues of mine, taking the time to sort of help others develop professionally, and just making mistakes. I mean, we have board members who are not afraid to say, "I told you so." And so for me, being a young, energetic, somewhat naive person trying to tackle things, a lot of times you sort of go with your gut instinct, and you don't necessarily use the data and the process that maybe a business program at UT would teach you.
Yeah, well. Your proudest accomplishment?
Proudest accomplishment is probably the way that we've changed the conversation around cancer. A lot of people talk about these yellow wristbands, and they talk about sort of that phenomenon and that brand and the money that was raised around that. But more importantly than the money was the concept that people are now proud to say, "I had cancer." People are talking differently. The stigma in this country around this disease is diminishing quickly as a result of our work. And so at the end of the day, if we all stopped what we're doing today and said, what did you do? I would say we changed the dynamic of a disease that was seen as a death sentence and is now seen as something that you can survive and thrive after your diagnosis.
I mean, speaking of the wristband, Livestrong, I think everybody would agree, has had a profound effect in the foundations trying to address the issues of cancer. Tell us a little bit more about why you think it has made such a dramatic effect. What is its secret to success, if you will?
Sure. Well, I think Livestrong is unique in that, yes, it's a nonprofit entity, but obviously we have a visible founder in Lance. We have now a brand that was created out of Livestrong. We also have sort of the benefit of sport, which can be such a unifying theme and unifying activity to bring people together. But we work on policy, we work on in the political realm, we work in philanthropy, and so the confluence of all of those pieces comes together to make a unique organization. I think the other thing is that we have a board of directors and a leadership and a governing group that includes a lot of entrepreneurs, a lot of venture capitalists, people who are willing to take big risks. And I think in the nonprofit sector, most organizations tend to be very conservative, and they tend to look for incremental impact. So a social service organization might say, next year we're going to help 20 more people, and the year after that we're going to help 50 more people. We actually are trying to do things that are going to change the game. And I think that's a unique approach, and I think that's why we've attracted a lot of younger philanthropists to get involved, because it's not just about writing a check, it's not just about volunteering, it's about really engaging in the issue and figuring out how in your daily life you can be a part of the solution.
What do you think you really have to do at Livestrong to continue to thrive and be successful?
Well, clearly we're living in sort of a strange economy, and so that's always a challenge. I mean, fundraising is always a challenge. I think for us, it's really demonstrating the impact. I think a lot of people get involved in philanthropy and contribute to organizations and volunteer their time and their energy and their resources. But at the end of the day, you have to be able to show them what that's accomplished. And so for us, we need to do that on a regular basis and over-communicate with our constituents. But it's an uphill battle. There's so many issues plaguing our society that we're constantly competing for attention. So today's a good example, World Cancer Day. My hypothesis is if you walked across campus and you asked 10 people what's going to be the #1 cause of death at the end of this year, that maybe 2 or 3 would say cancer. And so heightening that awareness and getting the World Bank, getting the World Health Organization, getting sort of mass groups and world leaders to pay attention to the issue that we care about is always a challenge, because you'll have something come along, you'll have SARS, you'll have the bird flu, you'll have H1N1, and if you look at those things combined, very few people die. Very few people's lives are dramatically impacted, and yet we focus all of our attention, we focus all of our resources, and we immediately just start pushing those things forward. And so cancer has been this sort of static, stagnant disease, and it's time to elevate that.
Yeah. How, just by way of information and background, how does Livestrong interact with other cancer organizations like the American Cancer Society and those kinds of things?
Sure. We have great partnerships. We actually fund a lot of smaller nonprofits that are focused on cancer and help them with their work, because we're an organization that's based here in Austin. We don't have offices all over the country or all around the world, so we partner on many levels. We have a great partnership with the American Cancer Society. For frame of reference, American Cancer Society is a $1 billion a year organization. They raise $1 billion every year. We are a $45 million a year organization. So you can see the scale is quite different. And yet they're eager to partner with us because of the brand and because of the sort of attitude that we have and the belief, and many of my colleagues are here tonight, and the belief that we can change the world. And some people might say that's naive, and it probably is. And some people would say it's audacious. And I think that the combination of the two is what makes the culture so special.
Interesting. I want to ask a couple questions again directed at the students before we turn it over to student questions. One is just advice. What's the best piece of advice that you ever got, and what advice might you give to students who are thinking about making a career either in the for-profit or not-for-profit sector?
The best advice that I was ever given. I'm going to go back to my parents, and my colleagues who are here have heard this 1,000 times. But when I was young, my parents taught me the difference between a community and a crowd. And the difference is, in a crowd, people push and shove and elbow and try and get ahead of one another. And in a community, people look around and they realize that at the end of the day, none of us is going to get ahead unless we all move forward together. And so that approach is what we use in our work. It's collaboration. We're never going to be the biggest organization. We're never going to have all the resources. And so we have to work together. Cancer is a burden to all of us around the globe. And so to solve the issue, we have to bring to bear every resource, every entity, every person that can be beneficial to the ultimate result.
Right. This one is very practical information, right? You choose staff members and you evaluate people all the time. When you meet people and interview them or talk to them, what makes them stand out in your mind? What makes you determine they'd be the kind of person you would want on your team?
That's a great question. I think obviously we have such a passionate group that people are drawn to our mission. People have either had cancer themselves, a family member with cancer. People have been touched by the disease. So clearly passion is important. I think the other thing is that we are a small group of people, relatively speaking. And so we need people who, we talk about this as generalists. We need people who have a diverse background and who are not afraid to work across disciplines. We're never going to be an organization that's so big and say, you're only going to do X, Y, Z. We need people to pitch in across various segments of our work. And I think in general, the nonprofit field needs more people with business acumen. People who know how to manage either businesses or projects or divisions or departments. The nonprofit field could benefit greatly from that.
Great. I'm going to ask one more question, an embarrassing question. Since so many of your colleagues are here and they obviously love and respect you, tell them something they don't know about you.
Wow. It's embarrassing enough that some of them get to sit next to me on airplanes and watch me react to every bump. Something they don't know about me. Many of them know this, but maybe not to the extent that I followed the Grateful Dead for a period of time, and I had long curly hair when I was in high school.
Unbelievable.
And that seems like 50 years ago, given what's happened in my life. But I used to follow the Grateful Dead.
That's quite a confession. Well, I'd like to turn it over to the audience now. Alex, could you help me with this? Maybe just carry the microphone to anybody that would ask a question. This is a small enough room to where you can raise a hand. Alex will bring the microphone to you. If you could wait till he gets to you, I think everybody else could hear.
My name is Shannon Emerson, and I'm from Howard County, Maryland.
Oh, wow.
Where there is a very active chapter of the Ulman Cancer Fund. So I wondered if you could speak to the mission and vision of the organization and perhaps ways in which students here at UT can get involved with the Ulman Cancer Fund.
Sure. So the Ulman Cancer Fund is an organization I started after I was diagnosed with cancer. young adults in general have really been neglected, not just in cancer, but in healthcare. So if you think about the healthcare system, it's set up for pediatrics and it's set up for adult medicine. So if you're 15, 18, 25, 30, you sort of fall in between. And when I was diagnosed, I felt like there were no resources. There were no organizations that were offering great support to people my age. And I couldn't even find other people to connect with. The first time I was in the hospital, I was sharing a room with someone who was in their 60s with lung cancer who was coughing all night, and it was evident that they probably would not survive. And so the issues that they were dealing with were much different than the issues that I was dealing with. And so we founded this organization to provide support, education, and resources to young adults affected by cancer. And we provide college scholarships to people who can't afford college as a result of their cancer treatment and the expenses that come with that. We connect people one-on-one for support. We offer educational programs and navigation programs. Being a young adult is hard enough, and then being diagnosed with cancer sort of adds another layer. So the idea is, we need more young adults to think about cancer. We need more young adults to talk about it. We need more young adults to encourage their friends and peers to either get screened, to stop smoking, whatever the issue may be. So on a college campus, there's a lot of value in having that dialogue. So it's definitely an issue that we're actually focusing on now here at the foundation as well, and something that I think we'll be able to show some dramatic impact and results in the future.
Hi, my name's Michael, and I guess I'm a college student. So I know you went through a pretty tragic time in your life, and during that time you were pretty depressed and pretty low. I want to know, how did you get through that? How did you find the strength to continue on to fight the disease, and what would you tell someone going through that depression kind of thing to move on?
It's a great question. I think clearly I had great family and friends, and was able to surround myself with a lot of people. I remember I was diagnosed for the first time in August, and I'll never forget sitting with my parents and talking about whether or not I was going to go back to school that fall. And my parents said, you can, if you want to stay home, you can stay home, but all your friends are going to go back to school. Mm-hmm. And so if you want to go back to school, and who cares what your grades are, but you might want to go back and at least be around that support system. And it was the best decision I ever made, because I ended up staying on track to graduate on time, and I ended up sort of being around people that were supportive. The difficult part is that with cancer, a lot of times people don't know what to say and don't know what to do or how to react or how to act. And it's nobody's fault. It's just an awkward situation, especially for, if you're 19 years old and your friend has cancer. I mean, what do you say? How do you approach that person? And I think that, as a survivor, the best advice I could give is just to be supportive, and just to sort of be there for people and say, you know what, if you need me, I'm here. I think that's very reassuring to the individual who's dealing with the disease. But there were definitely low points. That's for sure.
Hey, being a collegiate athlete, like you said you were, I'm sure you've heard of Mark Hurch, the linebacker
Absolutely.
from BC.
Yep.
I was just going to say, have you gotten to talk to him, maybe impart some advice on him? And if you have, could you explain a little bit what you did?
Sure. So he's an amazing guy. If you don't know, a football player at Boston College who, I guess about 3 weeks ago, came back to practice and is going to play this fall after a really debilitating diagnosis. Was on track to be sort of, I guess, one of the best college football players last year. I've emailed with him. I've not talked to him, but he seems to just have an amazing attitude. I mean, I've watched ESPN and seen his story, and we just sort of reached out and said, if there's anything we can do, let us know. And he just seems to be somebody who has tremendous sort of inner strength and willpower. And I think athletics, for me, and probably for Mark as well, it's so goal-oriented, and so it gave me a goal. It gave me the opportunity to say, I'm going to come back and play soccer, and I focused all my energy on that, and as opposed to thinking about cancer. Sort of getting back in shape and striving for something that you might not think is possible. So he's an inspiration, and he's going to be able to change other people's lives, because people will be inspired and ultimately will react to his story.
I'm Bin Tran. My question is, you said that Livestrong as a foundation is different from the other organizations and that you're trying to change the whole cancer. Can you give us examples of exactly how is it different from the other organizations in achieving this mission?
Sure. So one way that we're different from other cancer organizations is that we talk a lot about the fact that in some regards we're not even about cancer, we're about people. So you hear a lot of organizations talk about a cure for cancer, for instance. Not to be pessimistic, there will not be a cure for cancer. Cancer is over 400 different diseases. There will not be a magic pill, there will not be a silver bullet. Sure, there will be advances and there will be treatments and there will be effective therapies that extend people's lives. But we're not interested in that incremental sort of difference. So a few years ago, we decided to fund less cancer research because in the scheme of cancer research, there are billions of dollars being spent by governments, by nonprofits, by pharmaceutical companies, and for us to spend, 10, 20, 30 million dollars even would not be the best use of our resources. So we focus on helping people and their families affected by the disease. How can we improve their quality of life, whether they're going to live for a year, 5 years, 10 years, or 50 years? So an example I'll give you is that a few years ago we worked on a grassroots campaign here in Texas to pass a constitutional amendment that was called Prop 15, and it asked the state, it was calling on the state to fund cancer research. So we spent less than $1 million on this grassroots campaign, and the result was the constitutional amendment passed, and the state is now spending $300 million a year for the next 10 years on cancer research. So we turned an investment of less than $1 million into $3 billion for the cause. Not $3 billion for our organization. That wasn't the goal. Our goal is not to become the biggest organization out there, but it's to have the biggest impact. So we're looking for those sort of transformational moments. And another example would be, given that it's World Cancer Day, if for instance, at a future G8 summit, if leaders of the G8 put cancer on the agenda, that is for us transformational. It's risen to the level of support from the top leaders in the world. And 2 years ago, when President Obama made his first address to Congress, it was the first time a president had mentioned the word cancer in an address to Congress since Richard Nixon in 1971. So working on things that are going to change the game is sort of more of our attitude as opposed to sort of just incremental impact. And just to be clear, I'm not saying anything derogatory about other groups and what they're doing. Everybody is in this for the right reason and doing great work. And we're, again, partners with many groups. But when we look across the spectrum, what can we do differently? We can leverage our brand. We can leverage the millions of people who are part of our grassroots network. And we can leverage Lance. And so we had 2 members of our team yesterday in New York meeting with Mayor Bloomberg. The mayor's made tobacco control his #1 issue all around the world. And so we're working with them to figure out how we can be most effective together. So what assets do we have that we can bring to the table that will benefit the entire cancer community?
You talked about this a little bit earlier, how the nonprofit sector needs more, business students to, work in there. Can you talk about maybe as a business student at McCombs, we're not really pointed often toward actually working in the nonprofit sector. Can you talk maybe about why, why you've stuck with it, why you've decided to make that your career, and then, what would, make a business student want to work in nonprofit and where that kind of career leads?
Sure. I think traditionally, the nonprofit sector has been seen as something you do later. So you go out and you work in business and you make a lot of money, and then you give back, either financially or you volunteer or you get involved as a board member, and that's sort of, it's a touchy-feely thing, it's after the fact, and that needs to change. The fact of the matter is that we actually should never even use the term nonprofit. Think about this. Organizations that serve social good are actually the only organizations where we all profit. You don't have to buy stock in Livestrong. You don't even have to invest in Livestrong. But God forbid, if you or anybody you know are diagnosed with cancer, you're going to benefit from our work. And so the fact that we have a tax code from the IRS that designates us as nonprofit really does a disservice to sort of telling the story of what we do. And so we operate just like any other business. We have monthly financials, we have an audit committee, we have a board of directors. I mean, we aren't going to distribute profit to our investors or shareholders, but we operate this exact same way. And so in order to do that, we need people who understand business. And so you can have a career in this sector. This does not have to be something you do after you go out and achieve success, however you define that, for yourself. And so there are very few places that you can go to work every day and love what you do and go home at night and realize that you've helped change the world or helped change people's lives. So I have plenty of friends who make plenty of money and they're miserable. And we all do. We all know people like that. So my advice would be don't settle. There's no reason to settle. And I would also argue that you can get great experience and maybe even better experience at an earlier stage of your career in this sector. Because graduating from McCombs with a business degree, you can be so beneficial and valuable to, for instance, a small or medium-sized social sector organization, whereas you could end up, I know Michael was here last time, you could end up at Dell with 1,000 people with the exact same background, and you're one of 1,000. Or you could go into an organization of 50 people, and you could learn a lot about the entire entity and the entire organization, and probably end up in a leadership role maybe quicker. So I would just say don't settle for the typical path, and don't settle or accept the notion that you're young and you have to go through these steps to get to the top. That's not the way it works, in my opinion. You have to pursue mentors, you have to pursue opportunities, and as I was mentioning to the committee earlier, the educational system in our country is set up based on age. So when you're 10, you're with other 10-year-olds. When you're 11, you're with 11-year-olds. That tells us nothing about one's capacity or ability. And so why is it that the guys from Google can start Google, one of the biggest companies in the world, when they're in their 20s? It's possible. Anything's possible. So whether it's in the for-profit or the social sector, you don't have to settle for the sort of historic, traditional, more conservative path to move throughout an organization.
Your job, you spend every day working with people with terminally ill, disease. How do you stay positive and happy when you're dealing with?
That's a really good question. We definitely deal with a lot of grief and stress and emotion. And there are actually others here from our team who deal with it much more than I do in terms of on a daily basis. It's not easy. For me personally, it ebbs and flows. I'll go 3 or 4 months where it doesn't bother me, and then all of a sudden something will happen. So 3 weeks ago, I lost a very close friend of mine, 39 years old, wife and 2 kids, lives here in Austin, great human being. And you sort of wake up one day and you say, this isn't fair. And you say, are we really getting where we need to go? Because it became so personal and it became so close to home. That's just the reality of it. But at the same time, every day we're helping people. Every day somebody calls the organization and needs to find a clinical trial, or needs our guidebook and needs to understand which questions to ask their doctor, or needs to be empowered to get a second opinion, or whatever the case may be. And more times than not, that's the outcome. That we're getting emails and calls and letters from people saying, you either saved my life or you positively changed my life. And there's no better motivation to want to do something more and more than when you hear that message. So it's up and down. And we just moved into a great new, an old warehouse that we renovated in East Austin, which everybody's invited to come tour and see whenever you'd like. And we have a gym in there. And we have people that come do yoga, and we have people that come do acupuncture, and we've really tried to build the culture so that people have an outlet for their stress. And so if you want to go work out, go work out. If you need to go take a walk outside, if you need acupuncturist, whatever you need to be able to do your job and keep your emotions sort of in a good place, we're trying to provide that.
Amanda. First of all, thank you so much for being here. Your story is amazing. My question for you, or task for you, is imagine your life if you had never had cancer, and what do you think how would you view life if that were the case? And then compare that to your view of life now, and based on that, what is your advice for us? I mean, I haven't dealt with anything tragic like that, but I don't want to take things for granted.
Sure. That's a great question. So hard to imagine. It sort of seems, it's just difficult to imagine. But my plan was I was going to teach and coach soccer. So I studied to be a teacher. I did my student teaching, 7th grade, social studies. I love being around young people, and I loved teaching and coaching. So in one respect, I would be doing something to help others and sort of serve others. Then I was diagnosed with cancer, and sort of everything changed. And if you would have asked me 10 years ago or 12 years ago, where will you be? I would have had no way of sort of describing where I am now. I think it's hard to not become somewhat comfortable and complacent given the opportunities that we all have in this room. I will tell you, if you guys have plenty of stuff to read, but I did just read a book that is unbelievable, and it's called Scratch Beginnings. I don't know if anybody's read that, but it's highly worth the read. I read it in basically one airplane ride, but it's about a 25-year-old who graduates from college who becomes incredibly frustrated with his peers because he thinks they're taking things for granted. And so he gives every single thing he owns to his brother, including his wallet and everything. He takes a backpack and a sleeping bag and $25, and he takes the train to Charleston, South Carolina, and he wants to prove, he wants to see if the American dream is still available. And so he sets up a goal of, in 1 year, can he get a job, a car, and a place to live? And he shows up with nothing. And it's unbelievable. So he clearly has his education, but I read that book and I thought, until you put yourself in a situation, it's hard to really see or understand how resilient we are. But what I would suggest is that, and my coach in college, my soccer coach, taught me this, which is probably the second best lesson I've ever learned, which is if you don't set goals that seem unachievable, you'll never live life the way it was intended. So, we can all go through life sort of progressing incrementally, or we can sort of reach for it. And when you reach for it, even if you fail, you haven't really failed, because you've learned so much about yourself or about a specific expertise or discipline. So I would just say, go big. I mean, we're all here once, and you've got one opportunity, whether it's 50 years, 60 years, 70 years, 80 years. Leave your mark and make an impact.
Hi.
Hi.
Okay, so while I was doing research on the Lance Armstrong Foundation, I noticed that you guys are on Facebook, and I was just curious how being on Facebook has helped your company, if at all.
Sure. Social media, Brooke's not here, is she? Okay. So I'll tell this story. Many of them may not even know this. So about 2 years ago, we had a meeting, and somebody came, one of my colleagues came in and said, we need to have somebody full-time employee that all they do is social media. At that time, 2 years ago, I didn't have a Facebook page. Twitter wasn't even around. I didn't have a MySpace page, nothing. And so I was not a believer. Okay? So I said, no way. We have scarce resources. We only have so many employees. We can't have a full-time person just do that. Well, Brooke, who is our colleague, her title is online community evangelist. And I will tell you, if we could afford to have 5 Brookes, we could keep 5 people with that position busy, because the opportunity is huge. So social media has totally changed the way nonprofits can operate. It's free. It allows us to tell people in a very transparent, real-time way what we're doing. And so when I started the Ulman Cancer Fund, one of the things we did all the time was he had these nights where we would fold and stamp newsletters. Any nonprofit who is folding and stamping a newsletter right now is not going to succeed. So for us, at the click of one button, we can reach hundreds of thousands of people, and we can say, we need your help, we need a volunteer, we have an event, whatever the case may be. And it also allows people to self-select, so you're getting the core people. So anybody who's a part of our Facebook page or our Twitter page, you know they're engaged because they chose to be a part of it. And so rather than communicating to 5 million people, just communicate to the people that you know want to hear the message and want to be a part of it. And again, it's free. So talk about mistakes. Recommending that we not have Brooke full-time focused on social media was a bad judgment on my part.
How'd you talk you into it?
Well, they started data. They started sort of showing the numbers. Here's how many people we can reach, and it's free, and it's and it was sort of trial. Just try. I mean, I think as we were talking about earlier, so much of leadership and experience is just trying and just attempting things and learning from mistakes and moving forward. But we now have millions of people on Twitter. I don't think we crossed 1 million on Facebook yet, but we're getting up there. And so I think it's fundamentally changed. Now we're always looking for the next thing. So what's the next thing? What's the next? There's a company in town actually that we just talked to yesterday called GoWalla, which is sort of a Foursquare type application. So they want to partner with us, and so it's definitely changed.
Hi, I'm a cyclist and I'm training for an Ironman. So Lance Armstrong's obviously a huge inspirational figure for me. My question is regarding the nonprofit you were talking about, and it was kind of vague about there's definitely a need for young people of different backgrounds. So I was hoping you could get more specifics on the way that we could really go about getting involved, whether it's volunteering, interning, whatever, with a corporation like Livestrong, because it's not necessarily the type of thing that you see at the McCombs job fair or something like that. So maybe some more specifics about the way to get involved with that.
I'll make sure that we're at the McCombs job fair. So obviously there's tons of opportunity to volunteer, tons of opportunities to do internships. We actually have, I think, 10 new positions that are advertised right now, at least. 14. So we're definitely in hiring mode, but unlike sort of some of our for-profit sort of colleagues, we probably don't have as big of a budget in terms of recruiting. So we do go out to things and try to garner interest. So we, from the standpoint of our mission, again, cancer is such a big problem. We want everybody involved, and whether that is doing an Ironman and wearing a Livestrong shirt, or whether that's volunteering, or whether that's interning, whether that's working full time, it's going to take all of us to really have the impact that we want. So I would just say that while the Goldman Sachs of the world are going out and recruiting like crazy everywhere, there are things out there that may not be as sort of evident or visible, but we can benefit from your knowledge and your experience and expertise. Which one are you going to do? Which Ironman?
Louisville, Kentucky.
When is that?
It's August 29th, 2010.
Wow, that's intense. That is a lot of training. Good luck. We'll give you a Livestrong shirt if you want to wear one.
Hi, my name is Michael. You've talked a lot about reaching that younger population, and one thing that I remember is when I was younger, this sudden transformation from cancer awareness being something my parents did with the American Cancer Society to going to school and seeing almost everyone wearing a yellow bracelet. So what do you think has been the biggest advantage to Livestrong to reaching that younger population and raising that awareness?
Sure. The yellow wristband definitely sort of transformed things on 2 levels. One, on the cancer side, again, it was initially there was a popularity and a fad sort of element to it, and a pop culture sort of element that just allowed it to spread really quickly, and not just in the United States, all around the world. So we've sold more than 70 million of them. Last year, it was over 5 million. So people say, oh, it must be a fad, it must be over. Well, last year was 5 million of them. So now we're back to sort of the core, people who really are committed to the cause and care about it. So I think there's the cancer side, and I think it just attracted younger people. So if you look at the average donor of the foundation versus the American Cancer Society, our average donor is about 25 years younger. And I think it's partially because of Lance, partially because of the brand, and partially because people our age want to be involved. Like, they don't want to just give money. They don't want to just go to an event. Like, they want to understand the issue, and they want to understand how they can use their mind share and their expertise to help. And so we want people to be involved. People ask me all the time, who should I give money to? And I say, you can give money to any of a number of great organizations, but we don't want you to just give money. We want you to come and learn and get involved, because, you know, that's the benefit of sort of getting everybody's minds around it. The other piece of the wristband, which ultimately may prove more important, is that I think the wristband changed philanthropy, because every cause has one, and that's great. And it made it totally democratic. For $1, you can show your support. So you don't have to go to the black tie event at the Four Seasons and buy a ticket for $250. You can buy something for $1, put it on your wrist, and show your support for a cause. And so it totally democratized philanthropy from something that your parents did to something that we all can do.
Hi, thanks for coming. How involved is Lance with the day-to-day operations of the foundation? And, you know, if you guys clash heads, how do you deal with that or resolve it, since, you know, it is his foundation?
That's a great question. So I'll tell you a funny story. Well, first of all, so Lance and I speak at least twice, usually 3 times a day. And it's funny. He doesn't micromanage, but he wants to know what's going on. So a lot of times we'll talk at night, and we'll talk the next morning. And sometimes the next morning he'll say, "What's new?" Nothing. I literally went to sleep 5 minutes after we talked and woke up and there's a message saying, "What's new?" So he has sort of this desire to know what's going on. But again, he doesn't micromanage. So I was on an airplane probably now a year ago, and was talking to somebody next to me, and she asked me what I did, and I was telling her, and she said, "Have you ever met Lance Armstrong?" And I sat there and I was sort of stunned, but it showed me sort of the mentality is, well, he's probably not involved. He's probably, that's just sort of the mentality. And so the one thing about Lance is that, first of all, he wants to know everything that's going on because he's out in the public. So he never wants somebody to ask him something that he doesn't know or understand. Actually, tonight we had a going away event at our office for one of our colleagues who is leaving, and tomorrow's her last day. And I was just told from my colleagues that Lance was there and gave this great talk about her and her impact on the foundation. And but he's busy, travels a lot. The thing about Lance, and one of the struggles that I have, is the hardest part about my job is when to tell him he's wrong, or when to tell him he has a bad idea. And so a lot of times he'll go out riding his bike by himself for 5 or 6 hours. So imagine what happens when he gets back. He's got 52 ideas that he thinks are the best ideas in the world. And so in August, we had this global summit in China. And on the way home, we're sitting on the airplane and we're flying back, and he said something, and I said, "Interesting." And he said to me afterwards, he like paused, he went back to reading his magazine, and all of a sudden he said, "After all these years of working together, I finally realized that when you say interesting, that means bad idea." And I say interesting a lot.
That's great. Well, Doug, thanks a lot. This has been a great time.
You.
Thank you for coming over here. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
I'm going to turn it over to Alex. He has a gift he'd like to give you.
Perfect.
I just want to say thank you, Dean Gilligan and Doug Ulman, for your insights, especially into our careers and into our future. I'd like to thank the Undergraduate Business Council, the Student of Office Life, and the Lance Armstrong Foundation team for helping us plan this event. As a token of our appreciation, the Undergraduate Business Council would like to
I'll hold that.
offer you this personalized...
Wow. Wow. Wow.
Try it on, though. That's the picture. Yeah, that's the front. That's the front.
Wow.
Thanks so much. Really appreciate it. Thank you. That's funny. Oh, think it's small. It needs to get a bigger one. Yeah, he needs to get a bigger one.
You're the expert now.
Yeah, thank you for coming.
I've done a lot of jokes, but
Yeah, we need to get a little bigger. Yeah, I need a little bit bigger.